They was waiting for the police to come. They was telling people, civilians in the street, to go get the police, like call the police.
What did you make of that?
So I was thinking, you're a madman. So why do you want to do that for? You want to get caught, so why are you doing it like that?
So you would say, from your point of view, that they were trying to get caught?
Yeah, they wanted to get caught. They wanted to get caught. They was stupid people.
And when the police arrived, did they seem to know when the police arrived? What was their kind of instant reaction when the police arrived?
You see an armed police car walk over, drive around, and then both of them walk towards this police car, and the police lady jumps out and shoots them both.
So they didn't fire first?
No.
Did they have the gun out pointed at the police officer?
They had the gun out and they're just walking towards them casually with their arms down by their sides, and then I think there was a bit of twitching going on, and then that was it. It was just what happened in the flash.
Did you hear a warning from the police officer?
No, I didn't hear anything. I just see loads of people shouting around me, so I couldn't hear anything.
East London, this is
Joe Tallant there, very striking how he talked about how these two men, how these two attackers clearly were welcoming the attention, deliberately not leaving the scene, but wanting people to see what they'd done. The Muslim Council for Britain issued a statement in the last hour. They say, "Our thoughts are with the victim and his family. We understand the victim is a serving member of the armed forces. Muslims have long served in this country's armed forces proudly and with honour. This attack on a member of the armed forces is dishonourable and no cause justifies this murder." That statement from the Muslim Council of Britain a short time ago. You're watching BBC News.
Night is falling where you are. Just paint a picture of what the scene is like there now.
Well, there is, because it was such a busy part of London that this has happened in, there are countless roadblocks and police cordons in the warren of roads that come off from this extremely busy junction. If you've just joined us, I mentioned earlier, we are quite literally on what is known as the South Circular Road. It's sort of, before the M25 was built, it was the ring road round London, now in sort of closer to the centre of London. So extremely busy, and that probably makes it more challenging for the police to deal with. There are forensic officers still at the scene. It's all very difficult to pick out now, but they're still at the scene. And of course, what is different from anything certainly that happened a number of years ago is the amount of information that is on the internet, that is on social networks like Twitter. It is remarkable how, because these two men were deliberately inviting, despite having their weapons with them, inviting people to photograph them, it seems, and people did, and videoed them, much of that is on the internet. It's a strange characteristic. It is something the police have to deal with, as well as their normal forensic examination in minute detail of the actual scene. It's been an extremely gruesome afternoon. I spoke to the Bishop of Woolwich and the local vicar who was on the scene very quickly a little bit earlier, and they were talking about how difficult it is for the area to get their heads around just precisely what has happened here this afternoon in such a public way as well, of course. Back to Clive.
Chris Eakin there, reporting live from Woolwich. Thanks, Chris. Now David Cameron is in Paris, where he's been holding talks about the EU with the French president. A short time ago, he said this to reporters.
I've been briefed by the Home Secretary about this absolutely sickening attack in Woolwich in London. It is the most appalling crime. We obviously are urgently seeking, and the police are urgently seeking, the full facts about this case, but there are strong indications that it is a terrorist incident. 2 people at the scene of the murder were wounded by the police, and they are being treated as suspects. The Home Secretary is chairing COBRA tonight to bring together the police, the security services, all of the agencies, so that we gather every piece of information that we can. The police and the security services in the UK will get all of the support that they need to deal with this, or indeed with any other incident. I'll be returning to London later tonight so that I can chair a COBRA meeting again in the morning to make sure that we have all of the facts of this case. Tonight, our thoughts should be with the victim, with their family, with their friends. People across Britain, people in every community, I believe, will utterly condemn this attack.
The Prime Minister speaking in Paris there. Let's speak now to our chief political correspondent, Norman Smith. Norman, we heard that phrase again from Theresa May, and indeed we heard it from the Prime Minister earlier in that press conference in Paris, that all the indications are that this was a terror incident. Why the reticence?
Well, the reticence, Clive, is that's a very big statement to make unless you're absolutely 100% categorical sure, because there are all sorts of implications that follow from that. But let's just say that has been, I think, the working assumption from early evening, talking to Whitehall sources around 5:30 this evening. They were saying it was a fair assumption, and then we had the Prime Minister's statement, and the language he was using, he was saying that we had never buckled before and that the best way to defeat terrorism was to carry on with your lives as normal. Again, the language hardening with the clear implication that this was indeed a terrorist attack. And then tonight, of course, we had the Home Secretary pretty much confirming that, saying that we had faced terrorist attacks before. Now, I think that is probably as clear as we are going to get, that the fairly strong conviction, indeed probably certainty in government circles, is that this is terrorist. But they're not absolutely confirming it, because that is for the intelligence services, that is for the police, and they at the moment will be amassing all the details, trying to accumulate all the evidence, the witness statements, all the mobile phone coverage that there was of the incident, and I suppose also crucially these two suspects are alive and in hospital, and one of the sort of key things will be the desire of the intelligence services to question them, whether they are in any state to be questioned, to identify them, and from that to try and work out whether they were acting as a sort of lone wolves, as a lone organisation, or whether they were part of some broader orchestrated attack, which is going to be one of the central issues. The other key thing, which I guess many people want to know, is whether these were indeed British terrorists, which of course raises the whole spectre of homegrown terrorism. And that too takes it to another dimension, Clive, because of the, I suppose, ramifications, the reflections many of us will have if there are people in our own society, community, maybe brought up here, born here, educated here, who have carried out such an appalling act. So those are the sort of details which the intelligence and police services will be hoping to provide to the Prime Minister and the Home Secretary ahead of that Cobra meeting tomorrow morning.
We heard Theresa May, the Home Secretary, say that this was an attack on everyone in the UK and will be condemned by all communities. Is there any sense the general terror threat level will be raised across the country?
Well, we know, Clive, that security has been heightened at the Woolwich barracks and other barracks around London, and that, very obviously is, again, confirmation that this is not some mindless act, this is not some criminality, some drug-crazed murder. You wouldn't do that if you're raising security around other barracks. Clearly, there is a view that it is a terrorist attack. I suppose what follows on from that is whether that in any way implies there is a concern that this of itself may perhaps presage other terrorist incidents, hence the raising of security. I imagine it will be a desire to reassure service families that all measures are being taken to ensure soldiers in barracks are safe. And, I'm sure there will be guidance to military personnel about when they're outside of barracks, whether they're in uniform, how they conduct themselves, all that sort of stuff. There will be guidance issued to them. The more broad level of threat, I think, is predicated on whether this attack was a one-off, appalling as it was, or whether it is part of a bigger picture, that it does involve a bigger group, be it Al-Qaeda or whatever, and may indicate some broader level of terrorist threat.
Okay, Norman Smith reporting live from Downing Street. Many thanks, Norman. Well, our correspondent Gareth Furby, who's near the scene of the attack in Woolwich, had told us a short time ago what he could see in the area.
Yes, let's use the camera, and you can see the barracks fence, which is green on the left of screen there, and just beyond the barracks fence we have the police investigation continuing. Just round the corner there is a tent which has been put up by the police, and it is likely that that is covering either a body or a crime scene. Now, as you would expect, this has left the Woolwich community here deeply shocked, and I'm joined now by Lauren Collins, who was actually on a bus going past the scene moments after these events took place. So, Lauren, can you tell us what you saw out of that bus window?
I was on the bus travelling to Woolwich, and I saw a man lying motionless on the floor, which now I know is the victim of this attack. I got off the bus and walked round to another viewpoint of this incident and saw the tent, the police, the helicopters, and obviously everyone's reaction to this incident.
And at the time you actually thought it was a road rage attack?
Yeah, I thought it was a road traffic collision, as the car had a dent in the front, and so it's nothing new. And then as I learned what had actually happened, it's changed now. I feel upset.
Yes, give us your reaction. You've lived here all your life. What do you think now you're learning what has actually happened?
I feel uneasy that something like this has happened so close to where I live, and I don't know whether any more incidents like this will happen.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Laura. Now, what I must stress is that Scotland Yard is appealing for calm to the local community. It says police patrols will be stepped up for as long as necessary. But at the moment, this police investigation, as you'd expect, is continuing.
Gareth Furby there at the scene. I should warn you, we're now going to show you a still. This is a picture of one of the alleged attackers involved in this crime. Now, you can see him there clearly on the high street. He's talking to, it looks just like a passerby, but you can see in his left hand there some kind of weapon. It's been suggested that the man who died was attacked with meat cleavers, a machete, and other knives. This is just after the incident happened. It's right in the middle of the high street there, not far from Woolwich Barracks. Remember, this happened in broad daylight, 2 a.m. this afternoon, and the man, one of the alleged attackers there, clearly visibly holding a weapon in his hand, and behind him you can see the wreckage of a vehicle. We understand that the man who died, thought to be, though not confirmed to be, a soldier. He was knocked down, first of all, by the assailants, and then he was set upon in the middle of the street by them. But this, one of the pictures, as you can imagine, because this was right in the middle of the day, many passers-by were taking pictures of what was going on. There is graphic footage of what happened. And this, one of the clearest pictures of one of the alleged assailants involved in this attack. Moving on, let's take a look at what we know about the order of events today. And police and ambulance were first called to what they were called a serious incident, as I say, just after 2 o'clock this afternoon. Now, local people say a man wearing a Help for Heroes t-shirt was hit by a car, then attacked and killed with a machete or sword by the car's occupants. He's reported to be a soldier. This is the Ministry of Defence investigating, we understand. Now, an air ambulance and armed police attend the scene. Police officers shoot 2 men. One is seriously hurt. They're both now under armed guard in hospital. Now, the Home Secretary calls the attack sickening and barbaric and summons a meeting of COBRA, the government's emergency response committee, in Whitehall. And just after that, senior Whitehall sources say they are treating the killing as a serious Islamist terrorist attack, although that has not been 100% officially confirmed. Now, the Prime Minister condemns the killing. He says Britain will not buckle in the face of such attacks. It's confirmed he'll return to London early from talks in Paris with the French President. Now, the COBRA meeting is held at around 7 p.m. this evening and is told there are strong indications of a terror connection. It decides to tighten security at all London military barracks. David Cameron will chair a second COBRA meeting tomorrow morning. Now, the Muslim Council of Britain has spoken out in the strongest possible terms. It says the attack is truly barbaric and has no basis in Islam. The Islamic Society of Britain, but one which has also condemned the attack. With me now is Ashgar Bukira, a spokesman for a different organisation, the Muslim Public Affairs Committee. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. It's good to have you in. First of all, what is your response to this attack? Allegedly, these attackers shouted Allahu Akbar as they were doing this.
Well, it's a depressing cycle of violence, and it's not going to end anytime soon. I can see some Muslim organisations have condemned the attack, and rightly so, but the problem with this is that Muslim organisations have been condemning it for years, and what have they actually done? I'm not talking about those particular organisations that you've just mentioned, but across the board, Muslim organisations have failed to teach young people that there is another route for the grievance, the anger, the frustration that they feel about this government's policies in the Muslim world.
Why? Why do you think, in your opinion, the mainstream Muslim organisations have not got on top of this issue?
They've pretty much washed their hands on the youth. They're more interested in their petty theological debates. They're not interested in what is really happening in Britain today. And it's no good. And you watch over the next few days, Muslim organisation after Muslim spokesman will come up here, trot out how upset he is and how barbaric this attack is, and go back, and nothing will change. They will never teach their young people that there is a democratic way to bring a change to the foreign policy that they're so aggrieved about, justifiably so. And so young people are going to say, well, I want to do something. What are they going to do? They're going to take to what they see on television, and they're going to take to some of them at least, they're going to take to these barbaric attacks. And the government can condemn it all they want, and they can say, that Britain's got to stand strong and all the rhetoric in the world. But until the government admit that there's a direct link between this radicalisation happening and their foreign policy, how are we ever going to end this? There's two culprits here.
Okay, let's just step back a little bit. I mean, we heard from that clip from ITV News, this man suggesting that the actions that took place today were in response to British military action abroad. Specifically, British military presence in Afghanistan, one is assuming. For a lot of viewers watching this tonight, all they will see is British troops going over there trying to make things better. What is it that is so annoying, that creates so much anger within a section of Muslim society?
Firstly, it's not just Afghanistan. British policy across the Muslim world has been appalling. Yeah, and that's a polite way of saying it. Thousands upon thousands of people have been killed due to this policy. Millions lived under tyrants and dictators who often British policy backed. So it's across the board. But if we focus on Afghanistan, occupying, bombing a foreign country is hardly something, we can hardly argue that we're helping them. I understand the government's going to spin it that way, but that's not how it's seen amongst the Muslim community, and it's definitely not seen by these people who are carrying out these attacks. So until we be honest with ourselves and say that this policy has to be more ethical, better, and we have a debate about it, all we're doing is condemning it, acting tough on television. The government, going to have this Cobra meeting and say how awful and evil it is, mark my words, and then Muslim organisations are going to come up here and say how bad it is and condemn it, and nothing will change because the government can't admit that it's their policy that's driving the anger, and the Muslim organisations won't admit that they're doing absolutely nothing about their own youth taking to this type of action because they won't teach them the democratic way of bringing change in this country.
But to be clear, there is absolutely nothing that justifies this kind of murder in the name of some kind of retribution for some British foreign policy.
Of course not. But you have to explain it to understand it, to be able to stop it. And there's the problem. The problem is that as soon as you start to explain it and the British public need to understand, okay, well, here's the problem, then they can try to solve it. As long as we say it's nothing to do with foreign policy and just focus on the condemnation, the good speeches, then you're always in this trap because the British public are always going to say, well, why did it happen? You're never going to be able to solve a problem if you don't know why it's occurring.
I want you to be specific about the grievance and specific about what it is some Muslims believe is being perpetrated in an appalling way by the British, whatever their foreign policy is, abroad. Be specific for me.
Let us look across the Muslim world, whether it's in Afghanistan an occupation is happening, whether it was the killing of millions of people in Iraq due to a war that Britain participated in. Whether if we go back sometime, the Palestine issue, it didn't happen yesterday. This policy of Britain interfering and subjecting millions of Muslims to really appalling way of life has spanned decades.
But as I say, viewers watching this, all they will see is British troops dying in Afghanistan in an attempt to make the place a better place. I mean, are you saying that is all spin?
Absolutely. It's not all spin. Perhaps I'm sure some of those soldiers that go there believe that. But do the policymakers honestly believe it? And do the Muslims in particular believe it? No. Millions and millions of people are suffering because of the people that they've got to live under, often backed by Britain and other Western countries, and directly suffering because of the occupations and wars that are being perpetrated within the Muslim world. And the Muslim world, on the whole, is going through a radicalisation process. When you live in an extreme situation, an extreme response will occur because of that situation. And there's the problem. What the narrative that's out there, often pushed by the government, and hopefully they won't be able to deny it now because these bombers have actually said it quite clearly why they've done it, right? Is that it's a hate preacher. It's some crazy person who hates freedom. It's nothing to do with that. It's a political problem, and only a political solution is going to solve this.
Okay, if you just bear with me for 2 seconds, I'm just going to read out for our viewers a statement from Help for Heroes. It had been suggested that the man who died was a serving soldier, and he was wearing a Help for Heroes T-shirt when he was murdered. The statement reads, Help for Heroes is appalled to hear that a man believed to be a serving soldier has been brutally murdered in Woolwich today. We are desperately saddened to hear of this sickening attack and offer our thoughts and prayers to his family, colleagues and friends. So that a statement from Help for Heroes there. The operative word in that charity's title is heroes, and that is the view of the vast majority of people in this country. And I don't want to labour this point, but I just want to go back to the suggestion that for many people, British lives are being lost in Afghanistan and had been lost in Iraq in the name of trying to do some good. This is the general argument. You're saying that's a...
There's the problem.
Right.
You're absolutely right. In the name of something that is simply not true. The people in Afghanistan don't want the British troops there. The people across the Muslim world do not want the interference of the Western world interfering in their countries, and they have suffered statistically, across the board, millions of lives have been lost and their lives have been ruined because of the policies of our government and other governments in the Western world. And at some point, that anger and frustration is going to boil over. And you can see that, not just in Britain, but in America, in the bombings in Boston, and across the attacks happening right around the world. And we've got to somehow grasp the bull by the horns and say, when are we going to have a serious debate about an ethical foreign policy? If you were to oppress any community in the whole world, whether it was the black community, they would at some point start to radicalise, and some of them would take extreme action. The Muslims are not an aberration in history. They are acting exactly the way other communities have acted before. The only difference is that the government is claiming that it's nothing to do with them, and so the British public are in the dark as to why this is happening. They hate the Muslims because they believe it's an irrational response, and I'm saying it's an evil response, no doubt about it. It should be condemned, no doubt about it. But it is to be expected.
Okay. Asghar Bukhari, it's great to have you, and thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Hello, you're watching BBC News with me, Clive Meyer. It's just after 9:30. Welcome back to the BBC News. And our headlines tonight. The government has condemned the hacking to death of a man on the streets of southeast London. The Home Secretary called it a sickening attack. 2 men are in hospital after being shot by police, and the BBC understands they're under armed guard. The Ministry of Defence is investigating unconfirmed reports that the dead man was a serving soldier. Police are appealing for calm as security is tightened at all London barracks. We had a statement a little bit earlier on from the Home Secretary, Theresa May. She chaired a meeting of the Government Emergency Committee, COBRA, in the place of the Prime Minister, David Cameron, who is still in Paris at the moment, but he is returning home early after those talks on the EU with President François Hollande. And she made it clear that this murder in South London near Woolwich was an attack on all of society, and the decision from the COBRA meeting was that security would be stepped up at all military barracks in the London area. We understand that the 2 men who have been apprehended as a result of the attack in Woolwich today. They are under armed guard in separate hospitals, and clearly the hope is that the police and the security services can speak to them as soon as possible to establish exactly what happened in the middle, in broad daylight, in a busy street, 2 o'clock in the afternoon in South London. Well, with me now is the former commander of specialist operations at New Scotland Yard, Roy Ram. He's an expert on the terrorist threat to the UK and police response. Thanks very much indeed for coming in, Roy. Clearly, the main starting point here is to try and talk to these two men, and the hope is that the police will be able to do that at some point very soon. But there's a lot that they can be doing in the meantime.
Oh, sure. Yes, they will want to speak to them, but the first thing they want to do is identify them, find out where they live, get into those addresses, find out who their associates are, try and establish whether they've been acting alone, whether this is the limit of this activity, or whether they're part of something wider, whether they are being driven by something outside, some outside force, whether they're being given some kind of direction or guidance, or whether their motivation has been really self-driven. So they've got a lot to do, and they won't be sitting waiting inactive before they can speak to them. There's a lot to do. And of course, there's the scene to be managed, there's the witnesses, and what those witnesses say about the comments made by these men immediately after the incident is going to be very important in terms of motivation. And mere fact that they stayed there, and the evidence seems to be that one ran towards an armed police officer with a machete or a large knife, to the point where the police officer felt that her life was in danger and had to open fire. That in itself is very significant.
Okay, so from what you've seen then, and from the sort of bits of evidence that we're all trying to piece together, does it seem to you as if these were just two individuals who decided to go off and do this, or that perhaps there's a bigger conspiracy involved here?
I think it's way too early to come to any conclusions about that. Certainly, the police reaction will be, let's err on the side of safety here. Let's not assume that this is the limit of this activity, and they will be putting, I'm sure, alerts around other military barracks. There will be precautionary measures put in place, but I don't think anyone's going to assume that it's one thing or the other just yet. I'm sure through the night and over the next 2 or 3 days, the police will be looking very hard at the evidence. I mean, going into houses, looking to see if there are, perhaps videotapes, as we've seen, of other suicide bombers, these kinds of things, letters left behind, the whole lifestyle of these individuals. They'll be looking at mobile phone records, they'll be looking at who these people have communicated with, where they were in the immediate hours and minutes before this attack. And indeed, was this a completely random attack? Is there any association with the victim in this case? These are the basics of a crime investigation.
It's interesting, isn't it? The Cobra meeting decided that it was going to step up security around military facilities and barracks in the London area. I mean, I would have thought chief constables around the country would be concerned if they have barracks in their areas as well. Do you think this is something that might escalate in terms of beefing up security?
I think every chief officer will look at what's happened in London. They will be receiving briefings through the Home Office. I'm not saying hourly, but they'll be getting the information passed out, and I think that they will make their own judgments about military establishments. And of course, military establishments have been targets for terrorism, and they are on the radar of chief officers. So I'm sure that there will be a number of them that will be stepping up. There will be more patrols. And indeed, the barracks themselves will be on alert. They will be passing information to troops about what they do, what they wear, their obvious association with the military when they're off the barracks.
Okay. Roy Ram, it's good to have your analysis. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. Thank you. Well, my colleague Chris Eakin, who's in Woolwich tonight, has spoken to two priests who were at the scene shortly after the attack happened. They're the Reverend Jesse van der Valk and the Right Reverend Mr. David Ipgrave.
As soon as it happened, it must have just happened, we had the helicopters arriving, the police helicopters. Shortly afterwards, the Virgin ambulance, helicopter as well. We saw the police running up the road here, followed by police cars and the van that's just behind us as well. They blocked the road off, and then they blocked the top end of the road off as well. And local people were still walking up the road with their children, and children were walking around as well. We were not sure at all what had happened at that point, and so I went up to see with the other people.
And at what point did it come clear to you what had happened?
It's really taken all afternoon to become clear what's happened. Right next to the spot where the incident happened, the administrator told me that a body was lying in the road, that the headmaster had seen the body, and that the body had been, there was no head on the body as well. So at that point I think we began to realise, this was something more serious.
Were people frightened?
I think at first people were not frightened, really. Because we live in London, we see various incidents happening quite often, but something as serious as this is not all that common. And so I think as people realised something was still going on, the police were still here, the helicopters were still flying around, I think parents began to be, very concerned for their children.
And Bishop, I mean, it's an appalling image, a dreadful attack in the middle of the day with so many witnesses. I mean, the whole thing is really quite shocking.
I think people are increasingly shocked as the reality of what has happened is sinking in. This is, from the reports, a gratuitous and barbaric piece of violence, and I think people are coming to terms with that. The community is deeply shocked, and I think the message they now need to hear is one of calm and of reassurance and of a community in solidarity with itself. And I particularly want to say that this affects all our communities in Woolwich, including our friends in the Muslim community, who will be as deeply shocked and distressed by this as we are.
Well, with me now is our defence correspondent, Caroline Wyatt. Coming out of that Cobra meeting today, chaired by the Home Secretary Theresa May, was the decision to beef up security at military establishments, barracks in the London area. One would have thought military barracks were pretty secure anyway. What would beefing up security mean?
Well, by and large, these barracks are pretty secure. If you go there, you ask for your ID, you have to sign in. In most places now these days at the main barracks, you will have to either be registered there already as coming in as a visitor, you'll have your photograph taken, all of that. So security is pretty tight, but I think security clearly can always be tighter. You can double check and check again and make sure that everyone is expected. For example, if you're having workmen coming in, are they really the people that they say they are? Most places now, you're right, you do have to present something like a passport, a driving licence, an ID that is very clearly a photo ID. But again, over the last few years, I think as the IRA threat diminished, there was a move towards greater openness. For example, a move towards the military wearing uniforms outside their barracks once it was perceived that the threat from Northern Irish terrorism had receded, that it was now safe for the military to be out there, out and about, being seen, and being seen by their communities as well. And I wonder with this whether now, especially tonight, people are going to be saying to all military personnel, their commanding officers will say, make sure your personal security is good. Look out around you if you're going out. There may be, I don't know this and I haven't been told this by the MOD, but it may be that people are being advised, don't go out looking obviously military in uniform, etc., for the time being until the threat level recedes, until Whitehall and the rest of the country and the police know whether this was a single lone attack or whether perhaps there was a group or something more behind it. So I think it will have quite wide ramifications. It has horrified people within the military who are simply amazed, as are many others, that this happened in broad daylight on a London street in Woolwich. People are quite simply shocked at this. There's no confirmation yet from the MOD as to whether this was a soldier, but I think the fact that they're not denying that it was would make that a pretty fair assumption.
But it's interesting, though, because Help for Heroes have put out a statement saying that the suggestion is that this man was wearing a Help for Heroes T-shirt. That in itself could link anyone, potentially, in the minds of someone who wanted to do harm, to the military. We don't know if he was wearing fatigues and trousers or boots or whatever. But the suggestion at the moment potentially could be that he wasn't in uniform. And yet he
Yes,
was attacked.
that at the moment would seem to be the suggestion that he was, we are told by eyewitnesses, wearing a Help for Heroes T-shirt, and that is indeed something that's worn by people who want to show their support for the forces and show support for a charity that has very much made its name being associated with helping British forces who were wounded in Afghanistan. So that link seems to be there certainly with the conflict in Afghanistan, and it is not at all clear at this stage, and the police haven't said, and certainly the MOD are not the ones investigating, as to whether this was someone who was targeted specifically or simply targeted as coming out of a base.
Very briefly, I spoke to someone from the Muslim Public Affairs Committee, a spokesman, who condemned this attack, but he talked about the grievances that many Muslims, he believes, have as a result of British foreign policy in Afghanistan. Now, you've reported brilliantly from Afghanistan for a number of years now. Can you sum up briefly what you think those grievances might be?
I think they have been made fairly clear over the last years. One of the government's rationales for being in Afghanistan is to say we must fight, or we have been fighting as UK forces, extremism in Afghanistan so that British forces don't have to fight it over here. There are those who say, well, actually, no, it's the opposite, that by going to Afghanistan, by going into Iraq as well, by fighting in places there, by the deaths of many Muslim people, that some Muslims will be radicalised, that those will be used. Jihadist videos on the web are pretty widespread now, that attacks, sadly, in which civilians are killed, for example, both in Afghanistan and Iraq, are used by jihadi groups to radicalise people against the forces who are out there, not just British, but Americans and other members of NATO. And if you look at Afghanistan in particular, many civilians have been killed by NATO inadvertently, accidentally, but nonetheless that can provoke a lot of resentment.
Drone strikes and so on.
Drone strikes in some cases, but also simply airstrikes that have been targeting what NATO sees as the bad guys, but which have actually hit houses, for example, where there have been women and children inside. And the last time I was reporting from Kabul, there was a case then in which 10 children were killed accidentally, mistakenly, in an airstrike that was targeting Taliban insurgents. And that clearly was something that the village was angry about, but these days it's a global village. Those images went out on TV across the world. It will have radicalised people.
OK, we're going to leave it there. Caroline Wyatt, many thanks for that. Caroline Wyatt, our defence correspondent there. Now, David Cameron is on his way back from Paris, where he was holding talks with the French president. Before he left, he said this to reporters.
I've been briefed by the Home Secretary about this absolutely sickening attack in Woolwich in London. It is the most appalling crime. We obviously are urgently seeking, and the police are urgently seeking, the full facts about this case, but there are strong indications that it is a terrorist incident. 2 people at the scene of the murder were wounded by the police, and they are being treated as suspects. The Home Secretary is chairing COBRA tonight to bring together the police, the security services, all of the agencies, so that we gather every piece of information that we can. The police and the security services in the UK will get all of the support that they need to deal with this, or indeed with any other incident. I'll be returning to London later tonight so that I can chair a COBRA meeting again in the morning to make sure that we have all of the facts of this case. Tonight, our thoughts should be with the victim, with their family, with their friends. People across Britain, people in every community, I believe, will utterly condemn this attack.
The Prime Minister speaking in Paris a little earlier today. Well, the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, attended the emergency meeting convened by the government this evening, that COBRA meeting. He said the killing was a sickening and unforgivable act.
Obviously, it's early to have all the facts, but the Home Secretary has just chaired COBRA, and I'm afraid it is overwhelmingly likely now that this was indeed a terrorist incident of a kind that this city has seen before. It was a sickening, barbaric, completely unforgivable crime. I know that Londoners have been through terrorism before, and this city has a huge resilience. What we also have is the best, the most professional security services and the best police in the world to protect us, and they are now going to get to the bottom of exactly what has happened.
Is security being stepped up across this city tonight at military installations?
What I can certainly say is that we're looking at stepping up security at military installations, but you're going to get a full statement later on from the Home Office.
Just finally, just one more thing, if you can. What do you say to the mix of communities across London tonight who have seen terror return to the streets of the city?
Well, we've got to, with great respect, we've got to wait to establish the full facts. We've got to get to the bottom of exactly what happened. But what I do know, if it is confirmed that this is, as it appears to be, a terrorist incident, I know that Londoners from all communities, from across this city, have been here before. I know that this is a city of incredible resilience and courage. We will come through this, and we have to protect us the best security services, the most professional police service in the world.
Boris Johnson speaking a little earlier there. Well, Professor Michael Clark is director of the Royal United Service Institute. He also advises the Commons Defence Committee, and he joins me now in the studios. Good evening to you. Thanks very much indeed for coming in. This is a terrorist incident in everything but name, isn't it?
Yes. No question about it. The material that came out from the footage at about 4 o'clock makes it very clear that these people were acting in an Al-Qaeda-related way. They behead people. That's what Al-Qaeda does. That's what Sunni Muslims do. Shia Muslims don't do that. And Al-Qaeda is a Sunni organisation. They use the rhetoric that has been imported more or less directly from Ayman al-Zawahiri, the leader of Al-Qaeda, and other Al-Qaeda spokespeople over the years. And the intent to kill a soldier has been expressed many times. There are at least 5 people in prison at the moment who are there partly because they were trying to kill British service personnel. So this has all the hallmarks of an Al-Qaeda-related incident, although these two individuals themselves they look as if they were self-radicalised. They look extremely unprofessional, but very murderous.
So not under the auspices of Al-Qaeda, but following what Al-Qaeda tends to want to.
Certainly inspired by. I've only seen the same videos that everyone else has seen. I've seen the statements that were made and so on. But everything about them makes them look like people who were inspired by the Al-Qaeda message.
And from that video of that man trying to justify what is alleged to have happened, a very clear British accent, but it hasn't been confirmed that they are Brits.
Yes. I don't know any more than you do about that, but yeah, it certainly sounds like it.
Okay. From what you've seen, does it look as if these are just two men acting on their own, or they could be part of something bigger?
That will be what will be bothering the security services. I mean, I'm sure that the Cobra meeting tonight was concerned with what do we know about these people? Are they part of something else that's going on? Are they the tip of an iceberg? As far as you can tell, the body language and their lack of thinking about what they were doing and the way they were acting gives me the impression that they might well have been clean skins, as they say in the security service, and acting on their own motivation. I'd be a bit surprised if they were connected to some larger network, but we'll probably find that out in the next 2 days or so.
It is interesting, isn't it, that they allegedly committed this murder and stayed around at the scene. They didn't try to flee, try to get away, and indeed when the police came, eyewitnesses say that they ran towards the police.
Yes, they were homicidal exhibitionists, a bit like the Boston bombers in a sense. They wanted to make a stand. They wanted to go down fighting in some way. They had firearms with them. They knew, they must have known, that they would be apprehended, that they'd probably be shot, and this was going to be the stand that they were going to make. And that sort of exhibitionism either goes hand in hand with mental instability or with a commitment to being suicidal, but exhibitionist in their suicide. That's why they were not very professional. They didn't try to run off and do it again to somebody else. They didn't try to commit as much mayhem as possible. They wanted to commit a horrendous act in front of as many cameras as possible and be seen to do what they did. That again marks it out as Al-Qaeda symbolism of the most murderous sort.
I mean, you advise the Commons Defence Committee. How does any society protect against this kind of thing? I mean, is it possible?
No, you can't. I mean, this is a vicious murder, and vicious murders sadly take place reasonably frequently in our society, not as frequently as in many others. Given the other sort of cases that are similar to this, they have been exposed by good police intelligence services and police work. And so it's intelligence-led policing. And you have to rely on that. And one of the questions for the intelligence services will be, was there anything about these people that should have led us to pick them up? Again, I'd be a bit surprised if there was, but we'll see. But remember, there's been at least, since 2001, at least 30 credible plots, terrorist plots in the United Kingdom. Only one of them has worked until now, and that was the 2005 attacks of July 2005. But 4 other plots would have worked if the terrorists had made their bombs correctly. So British police and security services have been very effective, but also lucky. And that luck ran out today in a way that is very chilling, because obviously this can be done relatively easily by people who inspire themselves to do it.
Professor Michael Clark from the Royal United Services Institute. It's good to have you in. Thanks for joining us. Well, we expect to hear shortly from the Commander of the Metropolitan Police, Bernard Hogan-Howe, about the attacks. We'll bring you that as soon as it happens. But earlier this evening, Commander Simon Letchford from the Metropolitan Police spoke to reporters about the horrific events in London earlier today.
At approximately 2:20 this afternoon, police officers were called to an assault in John Wilson Street, Woolwich, where one man was being assaulted by two other men. A number of weapons were reported as being used, including a report of a firearm. Officers, including local officers from Greenwich Police Station and shortly after firearms officers, attended the scene. On arrival, they found a man who was later pronounced dead. At this early stage, I'm unable to provide any more information about the man who has died. Two men, who we believe from earlier reports to have been carrying weapons, were shot by police. They have both been taken to separate London hospitals and are receiving treatment for their injuries. I can understand that this incident will cause community concern, and I would like to reiterate that we are investigating the circumstances of this incident. The MPS will investigate the circumstances of this man's death, and the Independent Police Complaints Commission, as is routine, will investigate the circumstances involving the discharge of police firearms. There will continue to be a police presence in this area tonight and in surrounding areas, and this presence will continue as long as it is necessary. I would ask people to remain calm and to avoid unnecessary speculation.
Commander Simon Letchford there of the Metropolitan Police. We've just received a statement now from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe. He, of course, attended that COBRA meeting, the Government Security Committee meeting earlier on today. And this is his statement. It is hard to comprehend the shocking and horrific scenes we have seen this afternoon on a busy street as Londoners went about their day as normal. We have launched a murder investigation being led by the Counter-Terrorism Command. Two men have been arrested in connection with that murder. We understand concern about the motivation, and we will work tirelessly to uncover why this occurred and who was responsible. I understand people want answers, but I must stress we are in the early stages of investigations. I would urge everyone to remain calm, he says, and have a measured response to today's tragic events. In Greenwich, we have met with community representatives, and extra officers remain on duty there tonight. Across London, our officers are in contact with their communities too. The shock that we all feel at what has happened must bind us together, he says. Anyone with any information or who may have witnessed what took place in Woolwich earlier today is asked to contact the anti-terrorist hotline, and I've got a number for that, 0800 789 321. That's the anti-terrorist hotline, 0800 789 321. So that, the statement there from the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Sir Bernard Hogan-Howe. Now, it is nearly time for the BBC News at 10, but just a reminder that at 10:30 we'll be telling you which stories are making the front pages of tomorrow morning's papers. And at the moment, the only headline we've got at the moment is The Independent, which is leading, of course, with those attacks in Woolwich. The headline, sickening, deluded and unforgivable. And it goes on to say that terrorism has returned to the streets of Britain. And we'll be discussing the stories behind the headlines with the broadcaster Penny Smith and the political correspondent Sean Dilley. So join us for the papers at 10:30 here on BBC News. But now, though, it's time for all the weather news with Matt Taylor.
Hello there. Despite the fact many of you finished the day on a dry and fairly clear note, we've got some pretty heavy showers around at the moment, Scotland and eastern England especially. More showers developing through the night and an increasingly cold and strong wind. That'll be pushing the showers further and further south and more developing to the west than we've got at the moment, and one or two could even push inland across England and Wales later on. Heavier bursts certainly over the hills could mix in a bit of snow with that rain, but hail a distinct possibility still, and those winds touching gale force across northern and eastern areas later. A cold start to your Thursday morning. Bright one away from the showers across England and Wales. Showers most prevalent across East Anglia to begin with. But through the day, the cloud will steadily build, and we start on a much cloudier note across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England. Showers here to begin with, showers developing quite widely through the day. They'll be pushing through quite smartly on the strong wind, but there will be plenty of them around. Some of them still heavy, and through the afternoon in England, Wales, hail and thunder mixed in. Temperatures at best 9 to 13 Celsius, and feeling much colder in that wind.
Tonight at 10, a horrifying attack on a London street as a man is killed in a suspected terrorist incident. The victim's believed to be a British soldier attacked near a barracks by two men armed with knives and a machete. Eyewitnesses say they made no attempt to get away. One was filmed in the immediate aftermath.
You think the politicians are going to die? No, it's going to be the average guy like you and your children. So get rid of them. Tell them to bring our troops back so you can all live in peace.
Both men were shot and wounded by police. The Prime Minister calls the attack sickening.
People across Britain, people in every community, I believe, will utterly condemn this attack. We have had these sorts of attacks before in our country, and we never buckle in the face of them.
As David Cameron prepares to chair an emergency Cobra meeting tomorrow, new clues are emerging about the identity of the attackers. Also on the programme, a warning to Britain that more needs to be spent on economic growth, but the IMF stops short of urging an end to austerity. Reuniting families separated by the Oklahoma tornado, thousands have been left homeless. And how the red squirrel is just one of the many British species that could face extinction.
And coming up in Sports Day on the BBC News Channel, Sergio Garcia issues a public apology and says he didn't mean to offend Tiger Woods with his joke about fried chicken.
Good evening. David Cameron has tonight said there are strong indications that an attack near a military barracks in southeast London was a terrorist incident. A man believed to be a British soldier was hacked to death by two attackers who were later shot and wounded by police. One of the men was filmed in the immediate aftermath, his hands covered in blood, telling shocked bystanders, "You people will never be safe." Well, our Home Affairs correspondent Tom Simons is at the scene now. Tom.
Michelle, Britain has suffered shootings and bombings, but what stood out here today was the close-up nature of this savagery. Two men attacking one. It does seem, on the face of it, to be a terrorist attack. The men shouted the name of Allah as their blows fell, and they didn't seem to care who saw what they were doing. At first, some of those who saw it thought there had been a car crash, that two men were trying to help the victim, but then they realised they were attacking him with knives and a meat cleaver. The pair didn't challenge eyewitnesses, who later described it as an attempt to behead the victim, a white man in a Help the Heroes t-shirt. They dragged his body into the street, leaving him here, where a police tent now marks the spot. But astonishingly, the two men carrying their weapons, their hands covered in blood, did not flee the scene. They stood talking to eyewitnesses as a horrified crowd gathered. They asked onlookers on a bus to film them.
You people will never be safe. Remove your governments. They don't care about you. You think David Cameron is going to get caught in the street? When we start busting our guns, you think your politicians are going to die? No, it's going to be the average guy like you and your children. So get rid of them. Tell them to bring our troops back so you can all live in peace.
Joe Tallant watched them from metres away. He told me they seemed to be waiting for the police to arrive.
They could have easily got away from the space that the police come. They could have just walked off, gone about their business, and then got caught later. But they was just walking around the body like they was wanting the police to come and get them.
This eyewitness said that when police arrived, the men moved forward, arms down, one carrying a gun, and the police fired first. This was the account given by a senior officer this evening.
2 men, who we believe from earlier reports to have been carrying weapons, were shot by police. They have both been taken to separate London hospitals and are receiving treatment for their injuries.
During the violence, in a nearby school, terrified children were kept inside for their own safety.
We also saw an ambulance helicopter land in our school playground. So we all thought, people were saying we're going to die, and we all thought someone had died at that moment, because there was choppers, police and ambulance around, and we were very scared.
A large area of Woolwich is now cordoned off. This is now a complex police investigation of several connected parts. First of all, the body of the man killed in the initial attack. Then, the police shooting, being scrutinised by the Independent Police Complaints Commission. And beyond that, counter-terrorism officers will be trying to work out who these men are, why they did this, and whether anyone else is prepared to carry out a similar attack. The forensics officers are likely to be here all night, but they will only be able to answer some of the many questions that result from this unprecedented act of violence. It leaves this area shocked and tense. Michelle, something else that stands out from the incident earlier today, the ways in which people went to try to help this man as he lay bleeding on the ground, regardless of the fact that the attackers stood there with guns and knives. One of them, it seems, has left some flowers at the entrance to the barracks that's not far away from here this evening. It says, "To the poor young man who lost his life, I'm so sorry I couldn't stop these vile animals." Michelle.
Tom, thank you. Tom Simons in Woolwich, South East London. Well, the government has held an emergency meeting about the attack this evening, and security at other military barracks across London has been tightened. The 2 attackers are under armed guard in hospital as the security services try to work out who they are. The BBC understands that one of them may be of Nigerian origin. Here's our security correspondent, Frank Gardner.
An extraordinary scene on an ordinary street. One of the 2 alleged murderers today. But what do we know about them? There are unconfirmed reports at least one of the men is of Nigerian origin, a suspected jihadist.
In our land, our women have to see the same.
His statement to the cameras before he was shot by police and taken away did carry a jihadist message of revenge. Whitehall officials say the men tried to film the attack, during which they shouted, "Allahu Akbar, God is greatest." The Prime Minister, meeting the French President in Paris this evening, was clearly shocked by events.
Tonight, our thoughts should be with the victim, with their family, with their friends. People across Britain, people in every community, I believe, will utterly condemn this attack. We have had these sorts of attacks before in our country, and we never buckle in the face of them.
Inside the Security Service headquarters, the Joint Terrorism Analysis Centre is now considering whether it needs to raise the national terrorist threat level from substantial to severe. If this proves to be a concerted plot, then that threat level could possibly be raised. Tonight, key figures met in the Cabinet Office in an emergency committee called COBRA. The fact that COBRA has met tonight is a sign of just how seriously this is being taken. It was chaired by the Home Secretary, Theresa May, in place of the Prime Minister. She was supported by Andrew Parker, the Director General of the Security Service, MI5. Senior Metropolitan Police officers were also at the meeting. It's their Specialist Operations Unit, SO15, that is now leading this investigation.
The police and security service are establishing the full facts of this barbaric case, but there is a strong indication that it was an act of terrorism.
Security has been tightened, not just at Woolwich Barracks, but at several defence and security establishments. British Muslims have been quick to condemn the attack.
This is a time for unity, really, for communities to stand shoulder to shoulder with the family of this poor chap, with the army as a whole and with the armed forces more generally. Because I think this is a time when we really need to reach out and recognise that as a community of British people, we are one and we're united.
There will be no easy answers at the scene of the crime, but both the attackers are being treated in hospital and are expected to be questioned. The police and MI5's priority will be to prevent this bloody scene from being repeated. Frank Gardner, BBC News.
Let's join our political editor, Nick Robinson, now, who's live in Downing Street. Nick, it was Theresa May who was talking about these indications of terrorism tonight. At what point do you think ministers became aware that this appears to be more than a random attack?
My understanding is that ministers and the Mayor of London learnt very early this afternoon of the potential seriousness of this. Within an hour of the attack, reports started to appear on social media like Twitter. I understand that the head of the Metropolitan Police was in touch. Now, of course, at that stage, nothing was clear, but the signs were there. A soldier near a barracks in a Help for Heroes T-shirt. The suggestion from reports of witnesses on the ground that the attackers had done it in the name of Islam, that they had waited to confront the police after the attack, that they had boasted of their savagery and claimed to be doing it for an ideological or a political cause. It was not, though, until quite late this afternoon, just before 6 o'clock, that senior Whitehall sources started to talk in terms of it being terrorism, and as the evening has worn on, that language has hardened up. Now, of course, behind me in Whitehall, in the security services and the police, they will be asking themselves, is this a one-off or start of something else? And even if a one-off, they'll be asking themselves just what led to it. The seriousness is shown, though, by the fact the Prime Minister's on his way back from France, will chair a meeting of that emergency committee, Cobra, tomorrow, and he will know, as we all know, that this is the first terrorist fatality on the mainland since the attack on the bus and tube network in London on the 7th of July 2005. It's a grave night here in Westminster.
Nick, thank you. Nick Robinson, our political editor there in Downing Street. Let's bring you